We now take a look at the importance of skepticism, including some of the problems it suffered from, as well as contributions it made. Now, one of the obvious problems of skepticism is that with the skeptics who make an argument for their position as to why we do not know, they need a starting point in order to make these arguments. This, of course, implies that there are reasons for believing the starting points, which creates a bit of inconsistency, because if their view is we don't know, and they offer these reasons for it, the fair question to ask is, why should these reasons be accepted? And as we saw, the skeptics sort of end up into this problem. Now, despite these problems, the skeptics have made various contributions, which is why they're still important and were important then. One contribution is that, in the face of the skeptics, philosophers had to become more critical, because they had to either accept the skeptical arguments of the skeptics or respond to them. And so they essentially caused philosophers to have to up their game a bit. An example of this included St. Augustine and his work against the academic skeptics, of course, and also during the modern era of philosophy, basically Renaissance up till about 1899, the modern era made extensive use of methodological skepticism on the part of various philosophers, such as our good dead friend René Descartes and others. And what they would do, as I mentioned before, is the methodological skeptics would adopt skepticism not as an end. So their goal was not to show that we don't know anything. Their goal was to adopt skepticism, typically to refute skepticism. And so what they try to do, basically, is sort of testing to destruction. If for some reason you wanted to find an indestructible substance, one way to try to find it is just break stuff and keep breaking stuff until you find something that can't be broken. And that'd be a reasonable indication that it would be not breakable, at least not breakable with what we have available. And so philosophers like Descartes would take skepticism as kind of like a hammer to try to break, the claims of knowledge. And as we'll see when we look at Descartes, he's attempting to smash everything that can be smashed, and his view, crudely put, is when he finds something that's unbreakable by the skeptical hammer, well, that's our knowledge. Now, another interesting, or perhaps boring use of skepticism was that it was used to attack reason. For what reason? Well, interestingly or boringly enough, to support faith and revelation. The idea being, it would seem, is that what it would do is by showing that reason is full of pretenses and so forth and useless, that the only thing left to us in order to know would be faith and revelation, which is kind of an interesting strategy, because if the reason and our senses are no use to us, well, it would seem the only thing that could perhaps beat the skeptic, if we want to beat the skeptic, would be through religious grounds, that is to say, faith and revelation. And this includes, an example of this is our good dead friend Pascal, who we saw said, you can't, prove God's existence, but you can know God through faith. Also, of course, the classic Pascal's wager, which, as you'll recall, does not aim at proving that God exists, it's just trying to show that God is your best bet. Now, interestingly or boringly enough, skepticism might also help with the development of science. Why? Well, if we're skeptical about the real essences of things, then the thing to do is avoid metaphysics, avoid all that weird speculation, and stick to empirical examination of the world. Interestingly or boringly enough, this sort of anti-metaphysical, tendency in science has eroded heavily in recent years, and now, many of the scientists in physics and so forth are going back to engage in cosmology and what philosophers would consider metaphysical speculation. Now, skepticism itself went into a bit of a decline. How so? Well, one reason is that it never seemed to succeed in providing peace. Because one of their claims was that, crudely put, you can't know, don't worry, if you're not worrying, be happy. But the problem is, of course, is that not knowing wouldn't seem to make you feel not worrying, wouldn't make you seem, to embrace peace. The main effect was, of course, to create confusion. And so it didn't really, succeed in that mission. Now, another problem is that while it did undermine dogmatism, the view that we have knowledge, especially people clinging to knowledge and holding to it in the face of opposition, it didn't really provide us with any positive alternatives. So skepticism basically tore stuff up. You can't know this because the senses are untrustworthy. You can't put any faith in reason, etc., etc. But it didn't offer any positive alternatives. And while there is some advantage in tearing things down, the obvious next question is, well, what does it have to offer in its place? And unfortunately, skepticism seems to be pure destruction. If it succeeds, it shows that we don't know. Of course, they're careful to claim we don't know that we don't know. It's just that we don't know. And the idea of simply following existing traditions and customs wasn't particularly satisfying. The idea of, don't worry, be happy, and just go along, weren't particularly successful messages. Now also, one thing that helped bring skepticism down is the fact that there was extensive competition, specifically various religious philosophies, and later, of course, in the Roman Empire, Christianity, which offered, to most people, a better deal than skepticism. Now, skepticism is still alive and well. People still make the skeptical arguments, so its value, or at least its existence, still continues. And that brings us to the end of skepticism, which we don't know it's the end, but, well, well, actually you don't. But anyways, the end.